Hi, Tony from all the remote things back again with you today. And I've got my favorite meta developer with me, Aino Corry. How are you, Aino?
I'm very good, thank you. And thank you for inviting me, Tony. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on it. And team, if you're watching this and you've ever thought, what do I want to know about dating patterns, science, and retros all rolled into one thing, I have the person for you today. But before we go any further, Aino, would you like to introduce yourself and just let everybody know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Aino Corry. I'm from Denmark and I live in Denmark. I'm 51 years old. I've got three children. They're all adult now. And I'm at the moment working as an independent consultant. I've been doing that for about 12 years now. I really like to facilitate retrospectives. So I do it with everybody unless they have the chance to run away before I start doing it.
I've had the pleasure to know Ino for quite some time, and I've heard you speak. I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak. Of course, the Yao conferences, we know each other very well from the Yao conferences. So it was a no-brainer and a pleasure to get you on. So I think what I want to do is just dig a little bit into your background before we jump into some of the things I talked about today, and talk about how you really got here. You know, particularly your tech background, but the other things that have brought you to, like you said, the retrospectives and the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, so we started off in Denmark many, many years ago with a little girl who really wanted to be an electric engineer. And then in the high school, I had physics and mathematics and chemistry and stuff like that. And then my physics teacher was awful. He really didn't think that women could think. So he was very chauvinist about that. So I lost all interest in anything with physics. But I really still loved mathematics. So I wanted to study mathematics and become a teacher in mathematics in high school. But then when I started studying mathematics at university, um, a it turned out that after 1 year you don't have any more numbers in mathematics. It's just Greek letters, and you can't imagine things in 3 dimensions because you came up in n dimensions. And one of the things I loved about mathematics was how to, like, thinking about the geometry and thinking about the numbers. So that sort of killed my interest in mathematics in that sense. But then I also had to do a programming course, and in the beginning I just ignored it because I never touched a computer before. I didn't want to be interested in that in any way. It was just something I had to do. But then some of the other students dragged me into the basement and said, you have to learn how to program, otherwise you'll fail the exam. And then they taught me how to program, and it was wonderful. It was amazing. You could make the machine do anything you want much better than boys. So it was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed it. And then I decided that I wanted to pursue the computer science instead of the mathematics. So I became a master in mathematics, and I had a master in computer science, my minor in mathematics. So I still wanted to be a high school teacher. But then I came out in high school and I looked at the people in high school and I thought, not going to waste my life on those, even though I think it's brilliant that some people do. I really appreciate it. But it's too hard work for me. So instead of that, I decided to do a PhD in computer science so that I could teach at university level instead. So I did my PhD, and that was right when design patterns were new. So I my research was about the gang of four design patterns, whether they were actual design patterns or whether they were just simulations of language construction, other programming languages. So I looked into how do programming languages evolve, and how do the language constructs sort of how they contaminate it from other languages, that people come from another language, they go to this language, and then they want that language constructs and things like that. A bit theoretical, but also somewhat practical, because I did implement a semi-automatic documentation tool for Java programs with annotated abstract syntax trees, but that's something for another talk. Then I went out in industry because I wanted to become a university teacher, but I sort of I had almost 3 kids at that time, and I didn't have very much money. And industry offered me twice as much as university, so I went out in industry, started as a programmer, and started teaching Java programmer certification courses because Java was very new then. So I was teaching Java programming, I was teaching object orientation, analysis and design, um, software architecture patterns. I stayed there for a few years. Then I got headhunted back to university for a research project in what was then called pervasive programming, which you will now call IoT. Maybe there's even new names coming up as we speak. But my research there was primarily how do you create the software architecture for pervasive computing. For, in a sense, it was serverless architecture, right? So Bluetooth was also pretty new then, so we learned how to program to Bluetooth and try to make generic small software architectures, which you might call microservices now.
I think that's
And then
London now. Everything that's old is new again.
yes, again. And after I'd done that for a few years, I went back to industry again, where I was now primarily teaching and doing conferences. I had been inviting speakers for conferences since 2000, and at the moment I focused more on that, becoming more the head of the program committee and talking to other people who were inviting speakers. And then I went back to university again because I was headhunted into another research project, which was a research project about how to improve the teaching in computer science, because they had a problem with the teaching in computer science, which was not a surprise to me. And I was there to try to both do research in how do you teach and how do you learn computer science, but also trying to improve the teaching with the people who were already teaching. But there was a problem because the professors and the associate professors, they were like, we don't need to do anything in particular. Like, we have our career solved. And the assistant professors, they were very focused on doing the good research so that they could become associate professors and full professors. So the only ones that would really listen to me were the PhD students and the postdocs who were teaching at the university. So I started doing some smaller crash courses for them. But then after a few years, I quit that job, went back to industry again. And then the university asked me if I could still do some teaching for the postdocs and the PhD students. And I've been doing that since then. So yeah. And then when I quit the job to go back into industry from that last research project, that was in 2011, I think, I decided to go independent, because then I could become a consultant for university still teaching and a consultant for industry. So that's how I ended here.
Yeah, it's a really interesting. So I had a reason for getting on this particular day, and for those watching it, I didn't tell I know this, so I'm springing this today. Although in your hemisphere it'll be different, but it is International Women's Day. Women's Day.
Ah, yeah, it is today as well here.
There we go. So we timelines, and when we record these, and I could think of no one better to get on than yourself, because an absolute inspiration to the young ladies of today and what you can achieve if you want to go there. And as a father of a daughter, I think it's a brilliant thing. And I've seen you and heard you and talked with you and watched what you do, and you're really an inspiration in it. So, and I can tell everyone again, I was not expecting that from me. So
no, I wasn't. That's a good thought, Tony.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to hear your background, because I knew your background from having chatted with you, right? But I wanted people to hear that background of where you came from and that extraordinary journey to get here. Now, that journey brought you a bit of a circle round, and obviously you experienced agile and the modes of agile working, and one of those you gravitated towards is retrospectives.
Yeah.
And you not only gravitated to that, but you've done a book and written a fantastic book. I'm sure you've got a version of there, one I prepared earlier. So talk to us.
I've got a Chinese version of it.
Chinese, it's just been released in Chinese. Talk to me a little bit about that book and how you got to that.
Yeah, so the way that I started with retrospectives was that I went to a presentation by Linda Rising at the JAU conference, which is now called the GoTo conference. And she talked about retrospectives, and I didn't know what it was. I just went there because I always like to listen to her. She's brilliant. And then she gave me a book, the original book by Norm Kurth, Project Retrospectives. And I read that and I thought, this is brilliant. This is a way to make people talk about things that are a bit painful and actually do it in a constructive way. So I started facilitating retrospectives, and I did that first just for the company that I worked in, then for the clients that the company was consulting for, and then for my friends and family, and then the clients started asking me, could I also facilitate retrospectives here and there, and it sort of grew. And then there was one day at a conference in Aarhus where they asked me to give a presentation about something, and it had to be a new presentation. And I said, so how much time do I have to prepare it? And they said 20 minutes. And I said, what can I prepare that I haven't talked about before in 20 minutes? And I thought, aha, all the mistakes I've made in retrospective facilitation, because I've made a lot of mistakes in retrospective facilitation, because it's simple, but it's not easy. And sometimes the immediate thought, the immediate thing that you want to do is not actually the best thing to do. But once you're there with all these people looking at you, you tend to just do what feels most natural. So I thought out 3 retrospective antipatterns. I talked about that, and then people said that was good, and then I talked about it more and more, and then people started asking, don't you have anything we can read about this? And I said no. And they said, don't you have anything we can read about this? And I said no, it's all in my head. And then I made a Google Doc just to hand out to people when I was teaching. And then I talked to Simon Brown and Daniel North, and they said, why don't you put that Google Doc into LeanPub? Because then you can make money on it and you can get feedback. So I did that, and I made money and I got feedback. And then I talked to Pearson, and they said they actually wanted to publish the book. There were some other publishers that I contacted at the same time, and they did not want to publish the book because it's called Retrospectives Antipatterns, and antipatterns sound so negative. They wanted something positive. So I don't know how many times I've been discussing this with people, but antipatterns is not negative. It's not more negative than a stop sign in the road. A stop sign in the road is not negative. It's a warning, and it reminds you to do something different than you would naturally do.
And my first thought, when I saw it, I've seen you talk on this as well, but one of the things, it's almost recursive, right? So anti-pattern, retro, anti-pattern. So
Yeah.
you do the mistakes, and they're the anti-patterns. So you're retroing the mistakes that you made and the mistakes you read. So
I'm creating work for myself.
Exactly. Yeah, I got that in the title. I don't know if you meant that, but that's how I read
No, I did not, but it's a good thought.
that. So talk to me a little bit about some of those anti-patterns. I think that would be interesting for people to hear about. What are a couple of the really big ones that you're really proud that you put in the book?
I think one of the ones that I'm proudest of that I put into the book is also one of the first ones I talked about, called prime directive ignorance. And prime directive ignorance means that you are ignoring the prime directive that Norm Kurth wrote in his original book. And the prime directive, you can probably put some text on this video, but it really means everybody did the best all the time. That's the mindset that you should have when you enter a retrospective. Because if you don't have that mindset when you enter a retrospective, if you are thinking, oh, Peter was such an idiot, or Aino was lazy, or if that's what you're thinking when you're entering a retrospective, you'll not be really listening, because your intensity will be too high and you will want to only hear what fits with your picture already. So you should try to go to a retrospective with an open mind and a positive mind. It also holds for yourself. If you've done something wrong or bad or not smart, then you'll be worried about the retrospective, unless you actually believe that everybody goes to the retrospective with that mindset. And it holds also for the facilitator, because, as I said before, it's not easy to facilitate a good retrospective. So there'll be times when you are trying your best and things doesn't go well. Maybe you have to stop the retrospective midway for something that happens, or maybe you come out without any action points, or maybe you think we only solved the symptoms. But you have to be nice to yourself as well and say, well, prime directive, remember you did the best you could at any point in time. So the prime directive ignorance is when you choose to ignore the prime directive because you think that it's too hippie happy for the people. They don't really want to do that. They really want to find a scapegoat. They really want to find out who to fire or who to blame. And I mean, if you look at the internet, there's a lot of discussions about that prime directive. A lot of people think it's just too ignorant to have that. But I think that it's important to at least try to have that mindset. So don't ignore the prime directive is the refactored solution. Write it in the email, put it on the wall, just mention it to people. Just saying things out loud can change the mindset. Of course, not 100%, but it'll start the change. So that was one of the ones. The other one that I think is really important is the Wheel of Fortune. And the Wheel of Fortune, actually, I got a picture of it here on my mug. So you see the little octopus with the Wheel of Fortune. And the Wheel of Fortune is like in a Tivoli, where you turn that wheel, and then sometimes you get a prize, and sometimes you don't get a prize, right? And to me, when you do what people call a quick retrospective, where they say, what should we stop doing? What should we start doing? What should we continue doing? Then they're already solving the problems as they're thinking about the problems. They're not spending the time trying to find the causes behind the problems. They're just solving the problems. So for instance, if people say that we want less meetings, then if it goes directly into an action point, you're just removing some of the meetings. While if you talked about it, you might understand that the cause is that the meetings are not very well prepared or very well facilitated. Maybe we don't need less meetings. Maybe we just need less people at the meetings, or we need a more firm agenda or success criteria or whatever. So these are two of the ones that are most important to me.
Yeah, I really like those, and having read the book, there's a number of really great ones in there. You know, because one of the things I obviously have done retros many times, like yourself, over the years, and the other thing that people often ignore, there's a lot of time spent on those things that haven't quite worked well, and those things that that. What about the good stuff? So they amplify the good stuff, right? And I'm going to be politically perhaps incorrect here, but my father always used to say to me, it's easy to go from the penthouse to the outhouse. It's a very short journey. And my meaning of that is if you don't amplify or concentrate those good things, then they'll slide back. And often they came from where you started from anyway, and you've improved those. So
yeah,
on some of those.
Definitely. And yeah, it's one of the things that I have in this one of the anti-patterns is called negative team, and this is where the team is very negative, and they only want to talk about the negative things because, as you mentioned, they have this understanding of retrospectives that it's about solving problems, and of course it is the way that you sell it to people, but it's also about appreciating the things that go well and maybe seeing, can we turn this up a bit? Or maybe just appreciating it and saying, oh, we shouldn't forget this. This is very good. And this has helped us. And it's also a way of, as you say, sometimes it's things, action points from previous retrospectives that turns out to be good. And that's an even better reason for pointing it out and saying, like, remember this, because sometimes people will say, oh, nothing's happening at these retrospectives. We can just drop them. It's a waste of time. So sometimes it's a good idea to say, well, look at what we actually did 2 times ago. Look at what we did last time. Look at what we did half a year ago. That has actually turned into something good.
Yeah, that was the one I gravitated to. Okay, hence my spiel. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Now, the other thing about it is, as I said, you didn't just write the book, and you also have a course, and you also talk about distributed retro. So let's talk about the course just a little bit. What's the course entail?
So I have a course about retrospective facilitation, and you can find it on my website metadeveloper.com. So it's a course where I help people knowing the practicalities of a retrospective facilitation, but also understanding the theory and the psychology behind it. So I have people signing up for this course. It's normally like a company that signs up all the people who are facilitating. And then first I talk a little bit about the theory behind the retrospective, motivation and history, but very, very little. And then I take outset in the problems that they have with facilitation. And there will probably be like some people who've done a lot of facilitation. There'll be some people who've never done any facilitation, but they were added to the course because they got the extra room for it. And then they have a big amount of people who've done maybe facilitation with one team or facilitation 5 times. So it's a very interactive course where they try out different activities that you can use in a retrospective, and we talk about, why does this work? Why would this not work? And if we take, sometimes people have enough time so that they can try things out also and get feedback about it. I use the anti-patterns here, not explicitly, but I use them to say that you have to be aware of this. Sometimes I call them anti-patterns, sometimes I actually don't. But I say you have to be aware of this, and if you sense this happening, if you're seeing these symptoms, then try to change it. For instance, if you have a loud mouth, I'm not necessarily talking about the loud mouth anti-pattern, but I say if you have a loud mouth and you realize that you have a loud mouth, then what you can do is that you can change it from plenary talking to writing on post-it notes or writing on their own, or you can divide people into smaller groups so that the loudmouth is only contaminating 1 or 2 people. And the same thing for people who are very shy and doesn't want to talk. It's easier if it's not plenary. Actually, that plenary discussion is not good for very much, to be honest.
No. Yeah, that's an interesting course for me, because I think there would not be too many people who actually teach how to do retrospectives, right? Normally there's books and normally, this, or there's a dot point to follow, or people say, just go do it or try it. It's very rare that they actually teach people or coaches to do the retro. So that's why I wanted to bring that up.
Normally it's just part of a whole course about agile coaching.
That's right.
So in one sense, it's a very specific course where we are we're going into absolutely geeky detail about retrospectives.
Yeah.
But also what I hear from people who's had the course is that this is actually useful for all kinds of meetings. It's also like good for weekly meetings or workshops or idea generation or whatever, because it's people and brains are the same no matter if they're doing a retrospective or a real meeting. So, a different kind of meeting.
or on people, on your own, or your family, as well as we were sitting off air.
Yeah,
use it on your own as well. Although in my house, if I say I try to use it, as they go, don't do that agile thing with me. But anyway.
They start being like that. I like to do a little retrospective after each vacation and after each year with my husband and my children, just to see if we can improve anything. And when I introduced it, how many years ago was that? 14 years ago or something like that. The first time I had a retrospective with my family, we really found out some interesting things. So now, even though the teenagers, of course, as they should, they're not teenagers anymore, but when they're teenagers, they have to say no to everything mom suggests. So they did that, but they did it anyway, and we actually got something good out of it. So even though they had this reluctancy, they can see the point.
That's good. And they do say no. Well, they stand you in good stead for dealing with difficult stakeholders, right? So now the other attribute I wanted to talk about was distributed retro. So it's an interesting topic, and obviously being a cast about remote as well, and I work for the Remote Agility Framework, is close to my heart, because I got to say, in the last 3 odd years, there's been more distributed retros than there have been in-person ones across the world. So this is really coming closer. Let's talk about your take on distributed retros, the good and the bad.
Well, there's some obvious things that are problematic about distributed retrospectives, and one of them is that it's very difficult to evaluate the body language of people if you're only seeing this frame. And if people are not showing their face, it's even more difficult to evaluate the body language. And normally, the way that you evaluate the body language is to see how people are standing, where they're facing, whether they're leaning, or whether they're like alert. But also you can hear the small reactions. And if people are muted all the time, then you don't hear those reactions. So I try to tell people, please unmute yourself constantly, unless you have a barking dog or a screaming baby in the background, because I want to hear all those sipping a little bit of water or laughing a little bit, or all these reactions are part of my understanding of what's going on, a part of my understanding of, okay, should we continue into this, or should we move into a different subject, or should we divide people into smaller groups and breakout groups? So it's difficult with the body language, and it's difficult for people not to do other things at the same time. So when they've written their 2 post-it notes, they're like, okay, I can do my email now, or like find that book or something like that, because they're already on the computer and they don't think that other people notice that they're actually doing other things. You get very good at noticing that when you're facilitating online meetings. Like you can see when people are looking at something else, when they're thinking, like the whole face changes. But of course, if they turn off the video while they do it, I can't tell. But then, of course, it is a big tell. So there are some difficulties. The good things about these online retrospectives is that it is actually really easy to put people out in breakout rooms and talk 2 and 2. You don't have to spend time on people. Oh, do we have to stand here or there and walk there? You can just in a split second, they're 2 and 2 or 3 and 3, and you can get them back again. You don't have to walk out into the hallway and find them where they're talking. You can get them back immediately. Another thing that I think is great about distributed retrospectives is that people don't have an excuse for not turning up, right? Because it's easy to go to a distributed retrospective. Another thing is that when people are not really active in retrospectives, or if I have a lot of things to go through and I don't think I have enough time, then I do a round robin. Then I ask everybody one at a time. So what do you think is most important to talk about in all these things that we could talk about? It means that I activate everybody. They have to read the post-it notes in order to choose one. And I know that even if we don't go through all of them, at least everybody has had a chance to choose what they wanted to talk about most. There's a little bit more preparation going into an online retrospective because you have to prepare the boards. And in my experience, it's a good idea to send a reminder the day before with the link to the board. And it's a good idea to send a reminder 15 minutes before the retrospective to say, please remember to have a bio break and get some coffee before we meet, because otherwise they'll be sitting like this and wanting to do one or the other. So there's so many things to talk about when it comes to retrospectives online. I just got these cards, these collaboration super cards.
You mean these ones?
Yes.
I know where you got those from. Lisette's a very good friend, and she's been on the cast before as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And they work well, don't they?
I think they work well because instead of saying you're on mute, you're on mute, you're on mute, you put this up and it makes things a little bit more fun. And I think that you should take all the things in your life that are irritating and dreadful and make them fun instead. So I think that this is a way of making it a little bit more fun. And it's also a subtle way. Instead of saying, oh, you're on mute, then you're doing this, and then 2 or 3 people will be doing the same. And then you, yeah. And there's also the little warning here, I can hear you.
Yeah, I like
Elmo.
Elmo's my favorite. Good enough. Let's move on. I love that one as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, it's also greifbereit.
Brilliant. So I really appreciate that you took some time around distributed retros, because I think a lot of people, the one thing I see is, you don't forget async and sync. You don't have to do everything in sync. You can do some of it async previously. And I find if you're using it, different countries have different ways of dealing with things, and sometimes it's easier for people to do it offline and rather than doing it with the spotlight on them at the moment in time, if you know what I'm saying. So I think that also contributes to it. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, definitely. There are some teams where I can do something asynchronously. I can ask them to fill out post-it notes before, but there are some teams where only half of them are actually doing it, and then we have to spend time on it anyway at the retrospective. So it works in some places more than other places.
Depends. I think it's the old coaching method. It depends. So
it depends. Yes.
Brilliant.
Really. Good
now, look, I'm going to take a bit of a right-hand turn, and I want to talk a little bit about a few other things that you do. So the one I'm itching to ask you about is your dating patterns. you have a presentation, of course, on dating patterns. Let's talk about dating patterns. I know.
Yeah, so dating patterns. Many years ago, a Norwegian woman, Solveig, wrote a book about dating patterns that was actually built upon the Gang of Four design patterns book. I read it and I laughed so much. It was wonderful. And I decided to create a presentation based on the dating patterns for a pattern conference. And I've since used the dating patterns as part of other talks about patterns as examples, but I haven't recently because they're not really politically correct anymore. But since you are Australian, dating patterns is patterns for how to get a date with a woman as a man. But some of the patterns can also be used more generically. So some of the patterns can also be used by men who are already in a relationship to continue the good relationship with the woman. But and they're built on the Gang of Four design patterns. So the names are a bit like the Gang of Four design patterns. So it's really great. The mediator, the listener, and one of the one of the patterns, I think it's called the listener, is saying that a lot of women would really like men to listen to them. A lot of men don't want to listen to women because the women are saying so much. So listening to them is sort of overflowing the RAM, right? So it's the heads are exploding. But if you can remember something that a woman has said for more than 3 weeks, then you are showing yourself as a much better dating candidate than other men, because other men will not remember what she said more than 3 weeks. They might not even have listened, right? So if you can listen to what a woman is saying and you can remember it more than 3 weeks, you're standing out from the crowd and you have a much better chance of actually getting a date with that woman. And of course, it's a problem because you have to actually be listening and you have to implement the interface, look as if you're listening, because if you don't look as if you're listening, then it's all lost. You have to implement that interface. And then you have to actually use memory to remember what she said. And then you also have to find a clever way of showing her that you remember, because you can't just go up to her and say, I remember what you said 3 weeks ago, because that would be weird. But you could maybe buy when I said this, they said you could buy a record with her favorite music, but the time has moved on. You can give her a Spotify link to her favorite music now, I guess, or you can buy something, and then you also have to be aware that if she said something that contradicts it in the meantime, be careful not to have a dirty read of her memory. For instance, if she talked about her dog, and then in the meantime she said that the dog died, then it's not a good idea to bring some toys for the dog. So you have to careful of the dirty reads. Always update your data about what she's saying. And it's funny because it's written in the software language. That's why it's so much fun. But it's also very, very, very true. And if you're looking at these dating patterns as a man who would like to date a woman, I can definitely wholeheartedly recommend it. And every time I gave that talk, I would bring my copy of the dating patterns. And the first 3 times I just left it on the table and it got stolen.
Really?
Yep.
Somebody says, "Oh, I can use this." Oh,
Yeah.
we go. What you were doing, you were performing a service. So there we go.
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah. One of the things that it says in the book is that when they found out these dating patterns, they decided they did not want to publish the book, because if all geeks suddenly had dates in the weekend, there would be no open source code. There would be no new compilers being made, because we need people to just program instead of going on dates. And of course, it's not politically correct, because now it's also women programming, and women are not the same and men are not the same. So I've had people walking out of this presentation because they were insulted by things I said about men or women, because I'm being very generalizing. I mean,
I thought it was interesting. I was looking at it. And don't forget, you probably need data transformation service as well sometimes.
oh yeah,
You got to translate that. um,
yeah. What about virtual machines? I mean, you could have a lot of fun with that as well.
yeah, that's right.
Anyway, I think it's still possible to find my dating pattern talk on YouTube.
I did. That's how I. So you can do it. We'll drop it in the show notes for you as well.
Yeah.
Please take it with the intent that it's meant, I think. So you've done that as well, but then the multi-talent person you also do science teaching and tech teaching, right? So just talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that's really interesting. We've talked about all those other things, but you haven't gone away from your tech beginnings.
No. Yeah, so what I'm doing at the university at the moment is that twice a year I'm doing science teaching. So I'm teaching them how to teach science. So I am talking about how the brain learns things, or at least how we believe the brain learns things, how they can support that learning, and how they can use different activities to teach, for instance, algorithms, recursion, programming languages, things like that. So I've taken some general theory about teaching and learning, and I've made an implementation that focuses on computer science studies at the university. So I take examples from the courses that we already have at that university and try to show them that, because we had tried to have some pedagogical people or psychologists to teach this, but the people who are teaching computer science were saying, oh, but we're teaching something very, very serious and difficult. And when it's so difficult and people don't learn it, it's just because they're stupid. It's not because we're teaching it in the wrong way. And this is so technical that you wouldn't even understand this, lady. So we can't use what you're saying. But the good thing about me is that I started teaching at the university in 1998. I've been teaching algorithms, time complexity, compiler implementation, database management systems. I've been teaching in industry, both programming, architecture, and patterns. So they can't tell me that I haven't tried teaching that. That makes it a little bit easier for me to convince them that it's actually possible. And there's like two things that I think are very important when it comes to science teaching. The cognitive load that now the what's it called? The team topologies, people are talking about cognitive load for a team. I'm talking about cognitive load for a single person. One thing that they need to know when they're teaching is that more is not merrier. So the more you say, the more they don't learn. There is a sweet spot. The more you say up to this point, they learn. But when you talk more than that, if you give them more concepts, you are sort of breaking their brains, and the working memory cannot work anymore. It cannot load learning into the long-term memory. So if you're going over that sweet spot, you're actually ruining what you said in the beginning of the lecture. That's a very surprising thing for them, because they think that the more they say, the more the students learn. But it's not like pouring knowledge into a head. They have to actually actively construct their own knowledge based on what they hear. So that's one thing that's important. And another thing that's important is that it's actually okay for it to be fun. And that's something I struggle with in industry as well. If we're having fun, if we're laughing, if we're playing, they don't see it as work. They see it as a waste of time. But actually, if you're laughing while you're learning something, or if you are creating an experience while you're learning something, it's much more likely that the brain stores the information. But that's one of the things that I really struggle with getting them to understand, that it doesn't have to be boring and painful to teach and to learn and to work. It can actually be fun, and that makes it even better.
You know, that's wise words. I think no matter what you're learning, whether it be tech or, you know, or any of those derivatives, you're not enjoying yourself. I've seen so many, you know, I have a teenage son who's in university, and, you know, the classes that he loves are the ones where those people interact with him. Whereas there's somebody who sort of, oh, I've got to get my way through this. And
yeah,
that's great words. Look, we could talk forever. We're very close to the end of our time, Aino. How can everybody get in touch with you? How they can get involved? How can they get some science teaching, retro teaching, even a copy of the book?
Well, I need that. My website, metadeveloper.com, is a place where you can get both a free chapter of the book, links to how to buy the book, and also there's a website explaining the retrospective facilitation course that I'm doing. I'm also on LinkedIn, Aino Corry, and I'm also on Twitter, and I'm also on Mastodon now. Not that I spend a lot of time there yet, but I'm there.
Yes, myself as well. And we surely see you with Yao again sometime soon as well, perhaps out in Australia.
I hope so, if they invite me to speak, but I have been speaking there for quite a while, and I withdrew myself of the PC work from Yao. So I only come if they invite me this time.
Oh, well, we've got to make sure that happens. Okay, so it's been fantastic having you on. We'll drop all those in the show notes, by the way, if you're watching this. If you've got any comments or any questions for Aino, please drop them in the comments in the show notes, and she'll be happy to answer those. I know that for a fact. It's been fantastic having you on all the remote things. If you're watching this, don't forget to join our community, remoteaf.co. Click the community button, join us. Hundreds of people talking about remote and how we can make it better and make it work better for everybody. I know it's been fantastic having you on all the remote things today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.